Yep.
It's Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and myself, Ellie Costello.
Coming up, US and UK forces have carried out airstrikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen. It's a joint response to attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthis on ships in the Red Sea.
Houthi Deputy Foreign Minister warns the US and the UK will pay a heavy price for this blatant aggression and insists its attacks, both on Israel and on commercial ships in the Red Sea, will continue in response to Israel's war in Gaza.
And the Prime Minister says the strikes are, quote, limited, necessary and proportionate action in self-defence. Strikes are reported in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, including the capital, Sana'a. We'll have full analysis and the latest developments throughout the show. Our security editor, Mark White, has been following the story. So, major developments overnight with these joint US-UK airstrikes. Let us know what you think. Should we be getting involved? Should there have been, as some Labour MPs have been calling for, a vote in Parliament before we got involved? GB Views at GBNews.com. It's a packed 2.5-hour show coming up, but first, here's your news headlines.
Ben, Ellie, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at 9:30. Well, we start with our top story of the day, that the UK have bombed targets in Yemen in a bid to stop attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on ships in the Red Sea. Overnight, 4 RAF Typhoons and US forces targeted military facilities in Yemen that were linked to this week's attacks on HMS Diamond. Rishi Sunak says the UK will always stand up for freedom in the seas, and he says he will stand for free flow of trade. Well, in the last few moments, we've heard a spokesman for the Houthi group says that they will continue to block the passage of ships in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. They're also warning the UK and the US will not go without punishment or retaliation. The Minister for Armed Forces, James Heappey, says the UK, though, is acting in self-defence.
The action last night was the necessary, proportionate, limited response required to act in self-defence of the UK and US warships that are in the southern Red Sea, seeking to protect commercial shipping as it transits on that vital route between Europe and Asia. What we did last night was to degrade and disrupt the Houthi capability to launch those attacks. It shouldn't be seen as the start of anything more.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is making a surprise visit to Ukraine as the government announced it will provide £2.5 billion in more military aid to the country over the coming year. It comes as the Ukrainian president's been pressing allies in the West to provide more support in the fight against Russian forces as the war approaches its 2-year mark. Rishi Sunak says the UK will not falter in its support and will stand with Ukraine in its darkest hour. Here in the UK, the economy has grown by 0.3% in November. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. GDP had declined by the same amount in October, but the latest uplift was driven by the services sector, the biggest contributor to economic growth, with a rise of 0.4%. However, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says growth will be slower as the government works to bring inflation back to its 2% target. That's the latest. You can get more on all of those stories and many more by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, more from Ellie and Ben.
Thanks, Sam. It's 9:33 and to our top story today, as Britain and the US have launched airstrikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen.
Yes, the Houthis control much of Yemen and say they're supporting their ally, Hamas, by targeting ships heading to Israel.
The leader of the rebel group vows to respond to any assault with fresh attacks on Israeli and commercial ships in the Red Sea.
Our security editor, Mark White, joins us now. Good morning, Mark. Just in layman's terms, for people who don't know, before we get too bogged down in the detail, what's going on here? Why are the Houthis attacking ships? And what might the repercussions be for the US and the UK and allies responding?
Well, you touched on it in your introduction there. The Houthi rebels, which is an Iranian-backed group, have said that, you know, they are full square behind the Palestinian people and what's happening in Gaza. And so they have, over a period of weeks now, running into months, been targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea, but shipping, they claim, is linked to Israel. I have to say, those links are fairly tenuous at best, with some of the vessels that have come under attack from both drones and missiles launched from these Houthi rebels.
So what do we know about the strikes that took place last night and the sites that were hit by them as well?
Well, we know, of course, that the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps' US counterparts have been warning for more than a week now of the potential for military action if the Houthi rebels continued with these strikes. And they have done that, of course, with strikes that were launched Tuesday night, the single biggest drone and missile attack against commercial shipping and warships that were in the Red Sea, 21 of these drones and missiles. So in the wake of that, we had that action overnight. We have had US really at the vanguard, the spearhead of this operation, but supported by the UK. And that support came in the form, you're looking at the images on the screen there, it came in the form of RAF Typhoon aircraft that were launched from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. That's a long old trip, 1,700 miles really, to get down to Yemen. And that's, you know, just to get on station. They've still got to find their target, drop their bombs, and then return 1,700 miles back to Cyprus. But the reason that the UK has had to go via the RAF and Cyprus is because we don't have land attack capability from our surface fleet at the moment. The Type 23 frigates and the Type 45 destroyer that's in the region don't have the ability to launch these Tomahawk cruise missiles. We can do it from our submarines, but as far as we know, there's no submarine in the area as well. It points to the very difficult place that the UK military is in at the moment, with assets, with personnel, with funding. We can tell you that there was talk of sending the UK aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth, the giant 70,000-ton aircraft carrier, which is our high readiness carrier at the moment. We have two of them, HMS Prince of Wales as well, but they're both in Portsmouth, tied up. Queen Elizabeth was on deployment. It's there. It can be sent at relatively short notice to the Red Sea. And we understand that the Chief of the Defence Staff actually suggested that deployment, that would be the logical thing to do, rather than, of course, flying Typhoons so far. But that seems, for the moment at least, to have fallen on deaf ears from the Prime Minister downwards.
Rishi Sunak this morning, of course, in Kyiv, speaking with Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. Some would argue, why are we giving Ukraine even more aid when our own armed forces are so depleted? And on that note, why is it always the US and the UK leading the charge in these kind of attacks? Where's NATO, Germany, France? Surely they benefit from the Suez Canal shipping routes as well.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of points there. The reason why the US, the UK and others are fully supportive of Ukraine at the moment and what they're doing is because they say if they don't meet Russian aggression head on in Ukraine, and we're not doing it militarily in the sense that we're putting our troops in harm's way, but we are supplying the Ukrainians with the capability to take on the Russians. And what they say is if they don't do that, then Russia will just feel emboldened. Other nations in that area will be under threat as well. NATO allies. And of course, if Russia does attack a NATO ally, then we're all involved. So that's why the UK, the US and others are supporting Ukraine. But you're right, it's very costly. £2.5 billion this year we will be giving to the Ukrainians at a time when the defence budget is screaming out for more money here to support the Navy, to support the RAF and to support the Army.
I mean, sorry, Ellie, go on.
What do you think will happen next, Mark? So there's going to be great fears that this is going to escalate.
I think there's some real concern that might happen. We've got, of course, the words coming out, I guess, sort of soothing words, in a sense, coming out from the US and the UK, saying these are limited, these were necessary, and they're aimed at trying to de-escalate the situation. The Houthi rebels are not going to see these attacks in that way at all. They are very publicly saying that they will retaliate. They have the capability. There's 200,000 of them. They've been well armed by the Iranians. So let's wait and see what happens now in the Red Sea. But of course, if they launch more attacks on commercial shipping and naval vessels there will be more in the way of strikes from the US and the UK, maybe others.
And let's be clear, this isn't just a couple of hundred or thousand insurgents running around with AKs, is it? They withheld heavy bombing from a Saudi-led coalition in 2015. They survived that. They're still here today. So we're not dealing with just some small-time bunch of guys here, are we?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, some have suggested, look, we don't really need to worry about this ragtag militia group.
Yeah.
But that point you make there is very pertinent. 2015, Saudi Arabia thought they could just bomb the Houthis into submission and it wouldn't be an issue. Several years later, they had to effectively call an armistice, a ceasefire there, which is holding at the moment. And the Saudis, like everyone else, is watching the situation because the Houthis have felt emboldened by the action that they're taking, in support of the Palestinians. That has a lot of popular support in populations around the Arab world. Governments in the Arab world, that's a different matter. There's no love lost, really, for the Houthi rebels among many of these Arab nations. But as far as populations are concerned, there are many of them behind what the Houthi rebels are doing, targeting, as they say, Israeli-linked vessels.
Right.
OK, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. And we also have Defence Editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox, with us this morning. Very good morning to you, Robert. And you've been one of the first, really, to warn about this. You were warning as early as December, I believe, that you thought military action would take place in the Red Sea, and indeed it has. What prompted the strikes last night?
Well, thank goodness you didn't ask me how I knew. Actually, I knew. I was just explaining to Mark that I knew that they'd done the target sets.
Wow.
Because they had known by the third week of December, coming up to Christmas, that if the Houthis raised the game, if they sank one of the big freighters or tankers, if they attacked directly one of the warships, which is what they have done, then they would have to consider bombing the bases on the ground. The story is very complex. To go on from where Mark is what is Iran doing? And Iran isn't unified. Sorry to make it more complicated. You have the Revolutionary Guard Corps doing its thing and very much behind this. And they're playing a tremendously complex game of now you see me, now you don't. It's the game of distraction, as any conjurer knows, because they're pressurising Israel in the north through their proxies and allies and clients and friends like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the same sort of neo-Hezbollah groups which are different in Iraq and Syria, and there have been well over 100 attacks on bases where we have to add, it's not only where American troops are, there have been 30 attacks where British military personnel have been present. One or two have been injured, and so far there have been no deaths. And that's why I've been seeing this creeping along, that it was going to come to that. And now the game is, what is Iran's strategy? What does it really want to do? Because one of the great difficulties, there are two aspects to this. One is that the fighting in Gaza is not dying down, which is the cause for why the Houthis and so on say that they're doing things, Hezbollah in the north, in Lebanon. And the other thing is that the energy aspect of this is getting more and more complex and unmanageable, because not only do we have Tuesday, this massive attack on British and American warships, including HMS Diamond. But yesterday, we had the hijacking, the official state-sponsored hijacking of a crude carrier, the St. Nicholas, outside the Strait of Hormuz. We've been focusing on the Red Sea, but the next choke point up going east is the Gulf. And they said, the Iranians immediately put their hands up, said, yeah, we'll take it to Iranian port. This is tit for tat. The same ship under a different name was impounded, seized by the Americans last year because he said you had illegal or sanctions-busting Iranian oil on it. Confused? Complicated? Yes, and it's getting more and more complicated, because what is the bottom line? The bottom line is not only do they want the Houthis to stop, they want the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Seaway to be open again for shipping, because that's the way most stuff comes to Western Europe, and America needs Western Europe and Western European markets. I mean, not only are we seeing the port of Rotterdam in the north, in the loop, being affected, but ports like Genoa, Barcelona, Trieste in Italy, and they're not getting the custom now. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a smell to me, like now, as of this morning, of the crisis that came after the Yom Kippur War exactly 50 years ago, October 1973, which led to a massive oil crisis, oil embargo, driven by the Saudis and the Arab world then, this time driven by the Persian world, the Iranians.
Saudi overnight urging restraint from Washington. They don't want anything to escalate in the area, because the last thing they want, as one of the world's biggest, if not the biggest oil distributor in the world, is for the global economy to go into recession, which means people won't buy their oil. Is that the kind of response you expected from the Saudis?
Yes, very much so. And the other one, which is different with the other big Arab power, of course, is Egypt. And the Canal and the Red Sea run through Egypt. It is very, very worrying for them. They don't want war on their doorstep. They don't want to have to pick up the pieces, which they've had to in the past, from Gaza. And in the middle of it, we haven't talked about what is Russia and China up to. Russia is caught, is hooked up, deeply involved with its effort in Ukraine, with Iran now. And China needs as much oil and energy as it can get, not only coming down up and down the Red Sea, but above all in the Gulf. The fact that the thing that I was talking about, the state-sponsored hijacking yesterday, means things could be closing down in the Gulf is really very, very bad news for China as well.
Great stuff. Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard. I'm just going to bring in John Oxley now, political commentator. John, we touched on Iran there. Is there any argument in the fact that back in October, November, Joe Biden unfreezed around $6 billion worth of Iranian oil assets? Iran funding the Houthi rebels, of course. Is there any connection there, or are we being a bit optimistic in trying to blame Biden?
I'm not sure there's a direct connection there. What we've seen over more than the last decade is this very difficult management that the US have had to do with Iran, because on the one side, we know that Iran does fund a lot of these groups like the Houthis. It has links to Hamas, it has links to Hezbollah going all through the Middle East. And as well, it had its own nuclear program, that there was this agreement. We've known them take hostages, British and American dual citizens be taken hostage by the Iranian government. And it's the murky bit of geopolitics and diplomacy is you can't be too hard with these people and you can't be too soft. And so it's hard to draw those direct lines from one particular payment to a particular action and say, that's because we were weak. It may well be.
Well, it was a large chunk. It was $6 billion.
It was a large chunk.
Which arguably some of that would have gone to, their different proxy groups across the Middle East.
I mean, that could have flowed through. But at the same time, you see things, if the Americans had been holding back on that sort of stuff, would Iran be doing more of these activities as a form of leverage to try and get more out of it? It's a very difficult thing to balance, I think, both if you're the Americans and from the Iranian side, how they try and exploit the situation as best they can.
John, lots of our viewers are making the point that why are we getting involved in this when we see other countries such as France and Germany not wading in just yet? There has been no parliamentary vote on this. The Lib Dems are asking for a retrospective vote on military action. Keir Starmer so far has said he supports the action, but he does want Rishi Sunak to make a statement to Parliament as soon as possible on these strikes. What do you think this means for Rishi Sunak? Because it's going to be a landmark moment for him, isn't it? But it's got risk.
It does. Calling in military action is one of the powers that is still very much reserved to the Prime Minister. It's their decision, and it is one of the most serious decisions that they can make. Even this limited action, you are putting British personnel at risk. You are potentially opening the country up to retaliation elsewhere. At the moment, I think it's quite clear from the government they want to minimise those risks as much as possible. Our involvement appears to be very limited. It is very much led by the United States, but these things can go wrong. They can escalate. We've seen over the last few decades, there was the big issues of Iraq and Afghanistan, which was so terrible for Tony Blair, but even some of the limited intervention, for example, Syria and Libya, proved difficult for David Cameron. So what I think you're going to see over this is Rishi Sunak really trying to keep things as limited as possible and making sure there is that consensus there with the other parties, which at the moment there appears largely to be.
Yeah, especially the way they left Libya, well, mainly the French anyway. Just from a political perspective here, is there any clout for Labour or the Tories to earn by declaring maybe in an election year that they're going to increase defence spending, especially at a time of heightened fears over, geopolitical conflict?
That's definitely in there. So we saw at conference in October, the Labour Shadow Defence Secretary made a big announcement in his speech, sort of Labour is going to be the party that rearms Britain, rising to this challenge that we've seen from Ukraine and we're now seeing in the Middle East. They were pledging to increase defence spending by about $5 billion, I think, in that. We've recently seen in the last week or so Ben Wallace, not Ben Wallace,
Grant Shapps,
the current Defence Secretary, saying that Britain does need to increase its defence spending. At the moment, the Conservatives have had this pledge to increase from about 2 to about 2.5% of GDP. Originally, Boris Johnson said by the end of the decade. Rishi Sunak hasn't put a firm date on that, but I think what we will see from the Conservatives running up to the election is probably something concrete around that. And there are a lot of voters with concerns about the strength of our armed forces and the need to spend more on them.
Yeah, and I think lots of people will be reflecting on that today. Thank you very much, John. And Robert Fox, just wanted to come back to you for a moment. And in terms of this decision by Rishi Sunak, I mean, of course, there are risks associated with action, but surely there are risks as well with doing nothing.
Yeah, it's very different from Libya and the action where Cameron failed, 2013, over Syria, because this is a direct British interest and a direct British asset has been attacked, and that is response to that. The watchword there is proportionality. They would be lawyered up to the hilt before they did this. Batteries of lawyers would be summoned. Lord Charles Guthrie, when he was head of the armed services, used to joke, and in fact he commissioned me to write a piece. He said the only department in the army which seems to be in inexorable expansion is the legal corps, is the army legal corps. I'm not joking. I do take John's point. It is absolutely clear they're going to need a new national security strategy. And I've just been writing my commentary for the Standard today, sorry to put in the plug, so they've got to do it differently. It's an NSS, a national security strategy, because you cannot go on the way that they're doing, because, yeah, they will increase the expenditure, go to 2.5%, and it will all be eaten up by the new nuclear deterrent.
Yeah, and lots of people tell me, we used to rule the world, the waves, rule Britannia. Now we can't stop dinghies crossing the Channel, and we can't even get aircraft carriers.
And we haven't even got a dozen frigates to put to sea.
Yeah.
I mean, are we equipped for this going to this?
That is the big question, and I think that's what the Chief of Defence Staff, but particularly the chiefs, because the army is very heavily committed to Ukraine. We do a lot more than we're actually declaring behind-the-scenes training. And one of the things, let's not run things down, the Brit trainers are much appreciated, not only by the Ukrainian, but by the Baltics, the Poles, and so on. They like being trained by British soldiers. Very important. There's been a lot of commitment there, and actually, all praise the discipline, the approach of HMS Diamond and its crew. It did the job it was required to do, and a lot more, because the Americans, again, particularly like that style of ship because of the configuration of the radar and so on. We're looking out for the Americans as well there. It's the way it should work, but there's not enough, and the priorities are not clear, because actually, let's call a spade a spade. The Treasury ministers, Treasury officials hate defence. They think it's a damn nuisance.
Great
well,
stuff.
Priorities might change now, Robert Fox. Thank you very much, Robert Fox and John Oxley, for your analysis.
Stay with us. We'll have more on this story throughout the show. This is Britain's Newsroom with Ben and Ellie on GB News, the People's Channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst it is going to be quite a cloudy day today, for many of us staying dry, but some rain arriving in the north later. Ahead of it though, we have some clear skies first thing across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, so a frosty start here, some freezing fog patches to watch out for, and these could linger well into the afternoon. Further south for much of England and Wales, largely cloudy, perhaps some brighter breaks developing at times, particularly for western parts of Wales, maybe some further inland, but on the whole a cloudy picture and a cold one too. Temperatures suppressed, most places staying in mid-single figures at best. As we go through this evening and overnight, we start to see a front pushing its way in from the northwest. And so initially some persistent rain across northern parts of Scotland, but it breaks up as it makes its way southwards. So by the time we head towards the early hours of Saturday morning, it's really not going to bring a huge amount across northern England and Northern Ireland. Another chilly night to come though, a touch of frost in some places, perhaps some icy patches to watch out for, and again some fog patches as well. As we go through Saturday itself then, that front does continue to push its way a little bit further southwards, but doesn't bring a huge amount of rain. In fact, far southern parts likely to stay mostly dry, albeit quite cloudy at times, limited bright or sunny spells, but we should see some. Further north, increasing amounts of sunshine perhaps, but also some showers towards the north, and again a cold day, temperatures suppressed for many. Into Sunday, cold Arctic air across many of us, so even colder with more snow showers in the north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Lots more still to come, including the military action taken by the US and the UK last night against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. What do you guys make of it all? Let us know your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. Lots of you saying that we shouldn't get involved, it's not in our interest, it's too far away. Others saying that we need to stand up and, of course, defend ourselves.
Yeah, there wasn't a parliamentary vote on this. Should there have been? Do let us know. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Friday, January the 12th. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Ben Leo, and Ellie Costello.
Coming up to you this morning, US and UK forces have carried out airstrikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen. It's a joint response to attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthis on ships in the Red Sea.
Houthi Deputy Foreign Minister warns the US and the UK will, quote, pay a heavy price for this blatant aggression, and they insist its attacks, both on Israel and on commercial ships in the Red Sea, will continue in response to Israel's war in Gaza.
The Prime Minister says the strikes are limited, necessary and proportionate action in self-defence. He's in Ukraine today trying to shore up support for Ukraine. We'll have the full analysis and the latest developments throughout the show. Well, this show is nothing without you. We really want to know what you think about these strikes on Houthis in Yemen. There wasn't a parliamentary vote last night before that action was taken. What do you think of that? Should there have been? GBviews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news update with Sam.
Ben and Ellie, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at 10. Well, our top story of the day, opposition parties are now calling for more clarity on the UK's strikes overnight on Yemen as concerns grow over escalation in the Middle East. Overnight, the UK bombed Houthi militants in a bid to stop attacks on ships in the Red Sea. 4 RAF Typhoons joined US aircraft to target facilities in Yemen overnight that were linked to this week's attacks on HMS Diamond. Rishi Sunak has said that the UK will always stand up for freedom in the seas and the free flow of trade. But a spokesman for the Houthi group says that they will continue to block the passage of ships in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. They're also warning the UK and US will not go without punishment or retaliation. Earlier, Minister for Armed Forces James Heappey says the UK is acting in self-defence.
The action last night was the necessary, proportionate, limited response required to act in self-defence of the UK and US warships that are in the southern Red Sea, seeking to protect commercial shipping as it transits on that vital route between Europe and Asia. What we did last night was to degrade and disrupt the Houthi capability to launch those attacks. It shouldn't be seen as the start of anything more.
Well, meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is making a surprise visit to the Ukraine. That's as the government announced it will provide £2.5 billion in military aid to the country over the coming year. It comes as the Ukrainian president presses allies in the West to provide more support in the fight against Russian forces. The war is now approaching the 2-year mark. Rishi Sunak says the UK will not falter in its support and will stand up with Ukraine in their darkest hour. Here in the UK, the economy has grown by 0.3% in November. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. GDP had declined by the same amount in October, but the latest uplift was driven by the services sector, the biggest contributor to economic growth, with a rise of 0.4%. However, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says growth will be slower as the government works to bring inflation back to its 2% target. The Post Office has been accused of threatening the BBC over a Panorama programme involving a Horizon IT whistleblower. The broadcaster says experts who were interviewed for the programme in 2015 were sent intimidating letters by Post Office lawyers. This week, the Post Office inquiry heard from Stephen Bradshaw, who helped lead the criminal investigation into some of those who were wrongly convicted. He admitted that he was not an expert on the Horizon system, but he was aware there was an issue with it. Israel has called accusations brought by South Africa at a trial that's currently ongoing in The Hague as grossly distorted. It comes as South Africa asks judges to impose emergency measures, ordering Israel to immediately halt the offensive. The country claims that Israel's military operation in Gaza is a state-led genocide aimed at wiping out the Palestinian population. Israel, though, rejects those accusations, calling them baseless. It also said action in Gaza is an act of self-defence against Hamas. Princess Anne is on her final day of engagements in Sri Lanka to mark 75 years of diplomacy with Britain. The princess has visited her first Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemetery and left a floral tribute to the fallen. She also visited a Hindu temple in the capital and received the blessing of the chief priest. There'll also later be a reception where the princess is expected to say a few words about the relationship between the two countries. And finally, a bear found in an abandoned Ukrainian zoo has now arrived at a new home in Scotland. The Five Sisters Zoo in West Lothian has rescued and rehomed an Asiatic bear named Yampil from Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers discovered the bear in an abandoned zoo in the village when they arrived in July 2022, 5 months after that Russian invasion. Out of nearly 200 animals at the zoo, Yampil the bear was one of the few animals to survive the invasion. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom. For more, we're on TV, on digital radio and on our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, back to Ben and Ellie.
Thanks, Sam. The time is 6 minutes past 10. And to our top story this morning, as Britain and the US have launched airstrikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen.
Yes, the Houthis control much of Yemen, and they say they're supporting their ally Hamas by targeting ships heading to Israel.
Well, the leader of the rebel group vows to respond to any assault with fresh attacks on Israeli and commercial ships in the Red Sea.
We're joined now by our security editor, Mark White. Mark, just in layman's terms, for people that don't know what's going on, what's the basics of this situation? Why did we strike the Houthi rebels last night, and why were they in turn attacking ships in the Red Sea?
Well, the Houthi rebels are an Iranian-backed rebel militia, effectively, but they number around 200,000 fighters. They have lots of equipment, some of it fairly basic, but they also have anti-ship and ballistic missiles supplied to them by their backer Iran. They're one of the groups that is currently launching action they say, in support of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And for months now, they've been launching drone and missile attacks at commercial shipping in the Red Sea and up towards the Suez Canal, of course, that vital shipping transit lane. That has brought about repeated warnings from the US and the UK, who've put their warships in the area to try to protect the commercial shipping. But despite that, on Tuesday night, we had the single biggest attack that took place in terms of the Houthi rebels launching 21 drones and missiles at commercial shipping and at those warships in that region as well, including the British warship HMS Diamond, which shot down 7 of those drones. Well, I think it was then thought that it was inevitable that there would be military action, and those strikes came last night.
And what do we know about those strikes that took place last night?
So the strikes were spearheaded by the US. The vast bulk of the strikes were from that carrier group, the Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier group, which is in the Red Sea. That's well equipped to deal with it. It has the combat aircraft in theatre in the Red Sea there, and able off Yemen to travel there and to drop their precision munitions, their guided bombs and missiles, which they did. But they were supported by the UK in the form of 4 RAF Typhoon combat jets. But these jets flew all the way from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, 1,700 miles, just to get on station in Yemen, and then of course you've got to find your target, drop your bombs, and then do the same trip all the way back up to Cyprus.
Where are our aircraft carriers?
Well, it's a very good question.
Why do we have a navy that has no aircraft carriers in the region?
Well, we believe that the Chief of the Defence Staff and indeed Navy top brass were suggesting that it was probably a good idea to look to send HMS Queen Elizabeth, which is the high readiness aircraft carrier, a big 70,000-ton aircraft carrier, almost as big as the American supercarriers. It's 4.5 acres of flight deck. But there's two issues with this. If you send the aircraft carrier, you've got to protect the aircraft carrier. And there is real concern that we just don't have a big enough fleet with available ships at the moment to do that. We do have that air defence destroyer, HMS Diamond, out in the Red Sea and 2 frigates. So one other air defence destroyer, if we can get one out of refit at the moment, and a submarine would do that. Or they could rely on an allied naval power to help out there. But the other issue is the F-35 combat jets that fly from the HMS Queen Elizabeth. We only have about just over 30 of them, but half of those are being used for training the new generation of pilots that will fly the F-35. So given that, probably they could only muster about 10 of these F-35s to go on to the carrier, so you would need the likes of the US Marine Corps F-35 jets to come and supplement the number of RAF Navy F-35s as well. So it's a big old issue for UK defence. It's really struggling with manpower issues, with hardware issues in terms of the ships and the aircraft, and also just with budgetary issues as well.
But with those limited resources, we know that British forces supported those US strikes last night. Where is NATO in all of this? Where is France and Germany? Because surely that shipping lane is of huge importance to them as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not in NATO's area of responsibility, I guess, is one issue. But you're right to suggest, where is France and Germany and Spain and Italy and whoever else benefits from shipping coming through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, which we know is one of the choke points, one of the main areas where these container ships and oil tankers will head from Asia and the Middle East to Western nations. So it's a very legitimate and good question to ask why other European and allied powers aren't there necessarily providing the warships at the moment. We're told that the European Union does have plans and an intention to try to get up to three warships from European countries to go down there, but that would be some weeks away, we think.
Okay. Yeah, it does leave a bit of a bad taste in the mouth when we've got a depleted navy. Yes, it's us and the Americans going in. And,
it's always us, yeah, and always the Americans.
Top stuff. Mark White, you'll be with us throughout the rest of the day. Let's speak now to Defence Editor and Chief Foreign Affairs columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Con Coughlin. Con, can I ask you please, first of all, since Joe Biden's rather botched withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, we've had Putin invading Ukraine. You've had President Xi Jinping saying a couple of days ago that the motherland Taiwan would return this year. You've had Hamas, who had their attack on Israel, and now Iran kicking off in the Red Sea via the Houthi rebels. Has the West, thanks to Biden's slack performance in Afghanistan, left us a bit of a laughingstock? Are people taking their opportunity to give us a bit of a kicking?
Well, good morning, Ben. Yes, I mean, I think when you look around the world, the absence of effective and strong leadership within the Western alliance is a big problem. Traditionally, we've looked to Washington for that kind of leadership, but we have a very weak American president who's conflict averse, which is the last thing you need when you're dealing with autocratic regimes like Iran, Russia and China. And in the absence of effective and strong leadership, you see these hostile, malign states agitating to exploit the vacuum. And that's what's happened in the last few years, and especially since the withdrawal from Afghanistan 3 years ago. I mean, if you look at the timing of the invasion of Ukraine, it was almost Putin's response to the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. So, yeah, I mean, the lack of leadership is a big problem, and I'm delighted that finally it's taken months of delay, but we've finally done something about the Houthi threat in the Red Sea. It's long overdue, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
And Con, what do you think the Houthis actually want from this now? I mean, we know that they're backed by Iran. Perhaps it's more a question of what Iran wants from this now. But do they want the Suez Canal to be shut? Do they want this to affect world trade, or is it something greater?
Well, what the Houthis want, and you're right to mention Iran, because Iran supplies a lot of the technical expertise, the missiles, the drones, etc., that the Houthis are using to attack merchant shipping in the Red Sea and approaches to the Suez Canal. What they want is to disrupt Western trade. It is very noticeable that the Houthis are only attacking Western shipping. They started off saying they're attacking Israeli shipping. That's expanded to Western shipping. They are not attacking the Russian shipping or Chinese shipping. And this is basically a very clumsy attempt by the Houthis and their Iranian backers to put pressure on the West to tone down its support for Israel. So that's what this is all about. But as I say, this is a very clumsy way of going about it. It's also illegal. And the West needs to stand up to them and say, we are not going to have our economies adversely impacted by your terrorist activity.
OK, Con Coughlin, very good to have your analysis there this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Loads of you getting in touch on those strikes on Houthi rebels last night. Jeff says, should Parliament decide whether to be involved in bombing Yemen? Well, Parliament can't be trusted to get anything done, so no, he says.
Michael says, and of course this comment comes in the context of Rishi Sunak in Kyiv this morning with more aid for Vladimir Zelensky. He says, should we not be slashing our overseas aid budget and spend more on our own defence? Good point.
Yeah, Dave makes an interesting point, saying, I've got a simple question. Why is the UK the only country giving support to the USA? A reminder that this is a country that won't even give the UK a trade deal. Yes, very interesting reflections there on the special relationship.
Yeah, one more from Stephen. Just says, just to add a little clarity, decisions on military action are solely for the PM with advice from the Cabinet, National Security Council and Chief of Defence of Staff. He's under no obligation to inform Parliament, as a lot of Labour MPs have called for last night, prior to any action for obvious reasons, nor is he obliged to abide by any parliamentary decision on military action.
Yep, well, it is his right, isn't it? Some would say. So do let us know what you think. And finally, one from Jeffrey says, when will they learn this so-called proportionate action was rubbish? The powers that be know that the rebels will now strike back. Why are they letting them do just that? It's just putting our boys and girls in unnecessary danger. All it takes is one glitch and one of their missiles will get through and hit one of our ships. Do keep those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com.
OK, let's turn our attention now to the reaction from Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, who says he supports targeted strikes against Houthi rebels, but called for a statement in the Houses of Parliament, quote, at the first opportunity. Joining us now is former Labour Party spokesman James Mathieson. James, good morning. What's the situation with Labour then? We've seen a lot of tweets overnight from certain sort of, I'd say, far-left MPs of the party, even Jeremy Corbyn getting involved, saying that we shouldn't be getting involved in the Red Sea. What's Starmer's position?
Yeah, good morning, guys. So no surprise there that you've got the element, obviously, in the Labour Party from the Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs who are very, very much opposed to this action. Not a lot of them saying specifically why, but mainly coming from a position of, you need to recall Parliament. We want to have the discussion about it. We want to debate before Britain gets involved in any military action, which is a very standard position for that side of the party. However, Keir Starmer, as you point out, has taken that opportunity away from them. And he's basically said that, we don't need to do that. We will support the Prime Minister's right and the government's right to make these decisions, and they back it, more or less. That's basically Keir Starmer's position in a nutshell.
James, I wanted to ask you about a tweet in the last few minutes from Diane Abbott, who has tweeted, I'll just get it up here, in 2020, Keir Starmer said no more illegal wars. He said they would only back war if it was legal, had a viable objective, and Parliament gave consent. The current military action on Yemen has none of these, yet he supports it. What's your reaction to that tweet? Oh, have we lost James?
Yeah.
It sounds as though we've lost James. We'll just try and reconnect with him. Looks as though we are having technical difficulties there, reconnecting with James Mathewson. But it is very interesting, isn't it? This criticism coming from Diane Abbott towards Sir Keir Starmer, suggesting perhaps that lessons have not been learnt from Labour when it comes to wars of the past.
Well, she makes a good point, actually, which is a rarity to hear me saying that about Diane Abbott. But it falls into this perception of Keir Starmer as what some opponents would call Sir Flip-Flop. He's ever changing on positions. Is he now only towing the line, backing airstrikes in Yemen? Because he knows that he's got an open goal for government, potentially, and he's got to play the game instead of sticking to his values and his real thoughts on things. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, echoing the same sentiments from Diane Abbott, and Keir Starmer, up until a couple of years back, was one of Corbyn's biggest supporters. He wanted the man to be Prime Minister.
Well, just as a reminder, Sir Keir Starmer says he does support this action, but he does want Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to make a statement to Parliament on these strikes as soon as possible. I believe we have now reconnected to former Labour Party spokesman James Mathewson. Very good to see you this morning. Can you hear me, James?
Got you loud and clear.
Very good. I don't know if you heard just before, but I was just reading you a tweet from Diane Abbott, now independent MP, being critical of Sir Keir Starmer. I'll just share it again with you. In 2020, Sir Keir Starmer said no more illegal wars. He said he would only back war if it was legal, had a viable objective, and Parliament gave consent. The current military action on Yemen has none of these, yet he supports it. What do you make of that critical tweet from Diane Abbott?
Yeah, not surprising at all from Diane, to be honest. However, the fascinating thing is I had discussed with somebody who works in the leader's office only a few days ago the potential situation that they the thing that they would least like to happen between now and the general election. And they said it would be airstrikes or military action, because that situation puts Keir in such a difficult position to try and balance the party, whereas previously he's managed to get all his ducks in a row and make everything off the same hymn sheet, more or less. You know, you're never going to control certain elements of the Labour Party, but airstrikes and military action will always cause great controversy in the Labour Party and the wider Labour movement as well. You forget the trade unions have a say in this, and they have pretty strong positions when it comes to foreign policy.
Tomorrow is what was a pre-organised pro-Palestine march in central London. I suspect now a lot of that is going to become an anti-war, anti-military action protest, and you may even see, as we saw with some pro-Hamas placards in previous Palestine marches in London, you may even see some pro-Houthi rebel signs or flags. It wouldn't surprise me. What are you expecting tomorrow from these pro-Palestine marches? Do you think we're going to get a growing anti-war sentiment from what is majoritively the left?
Yeah, I think so, but I think, casting it off as just the left is we do at our peril, because there are lots of people who don't want to see, and it was similar with the pro-Palestinian marches, there are people who come out on those marches who genuinely are moved by this issue, by the fact that they see bombing anywhere in the world, they see violence taking place anywhere in the world, and sometimes these people don't have all the information, all the context, but they want to come out and they want to show their support. Britain has a strong history of that. I mean, remember the anti-Iraq war march was absolutely colossal. So, there's a proud history of that. So it's not just the left, but there will be, you're absolutely right, there will be danger of everything being conflated together into this anti-war, anti-any kind of military action march. And the Labour Party needs to be very careful which side it takes.
OK, James Mathewson, really good to have your analysis this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, tomorrow's protest is going to be very interesting indeed. Very keen to see how that turns out. So, yeah, lots to get through in the next couple of hours. Next up, what does all this mean for the world shipping and the economy? Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, will be here to tell us more about what the events in the Red Sea could mean for the markets at home, including your energy prices, even your food. And, of course, Rishi Sunak was hoping that this year would be the year that inflation falls. It has already started falling.
Yeah.
Energy bills will come down, food bills will come down, in the hope that potentially a better economic outlook would secure re-election. But this could mean a bit of turbulence on that front. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben and Ellie. Stay with us.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:27. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and me, Ellie Costello.
Now, breaking news this minute. Yemeni media say that 5 people were killed and 6 injured in strikes last night between the US and UK on Houthi rebel sites. The impact of these strikes will be telling for everybody around the world, with a huge amount of goods being processed through the Red Sea and, of course, that pivotal Suez Canal route.
Well, let's speak now to GB News' economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Very unsettling news this morning, Liam, in terms of this military action on Houthi rebels. But there are going to be much wider ramifications across the world, aren't there? Tell us a bit more.
There are indeed. We have to distinguish between what's happening in the Red Sea, the entrance to the Suez Canal, and what's happening in the Persian Gulf about 2,000 miles away. They're not the same place, with the seizing of the hijacking, if you like, of an oil tanker by Iranian military forces. In the Red Sea, leading to the Suez Canal, that is the route from the Middle East to Europe. That's about 10% of the world's oil flows every day through that route. But the Persian Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz, that's the gateway into the Persian Gulf, that accounts for 25% of the world's oil flows every single day. So the escalation yesterday in the Persian Gulf, on top of what we've seen in the Red Sea, basically since mid-December, yesterday's escalation was particularly serious. But conflict in both those theatres, if you like, into the Suez Canal and into the Persian Gulf, are impacting now global trade flows. A lot of insurance companies won't insure freight shipping going through either route now, we're hearing. That's leading to fears that energy prices could spike, not just for oil, but also for gas. And if that happens, and we've seen signs of it, the oil price is up 2 or 3% so far over the last 24 hours since that hijacking in the Persian Gulf. That's going to impact everything. Petrol prices, diesel prices, the price of shipping freight in general. It could upend global supply chains, similarly as we saw during lockdown. And in some, it hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying it will happen, but in some, there's the potential here that we could see a reversal of this narrative, this benign narrative, this good news that's emerged over recent months, that inflation's coming down, interest rates are coming down, the cost of living crisis is easing, a feel-good factor is emerging, the Tories pushing the election out into the autumn in order to allow that feel-good factor to build. If these geopolitical squalls, these whiz-bangs, if you like, if they lead to a proper spike in energy prices, which could happen, then all bets are off politically. It will really impact, I'm afraid, the cost of living here in the UK and therefore politics in general.
Yeah, the Treasury have crunched the numbers and they think, well, they predict possibly in the worst case scenario that oil could go up by $10 and natural gas up to 25%. So, of course, putting a nail in Rishi Sunak's plan to leave or get everyone feeling a bit better off before the election. Can I ask you, Liam, about the GDP figures released this morning? Was it good news, bad news, or were we still flat as a pancake?
Yeah, you're right. Just to go back, the Treasury has crunched those numbers. You know, I'm one of those journalists who's closely connected with financial markets. I've worked in financial markets a lot myself. I had a chat with a mate this morning who's one of the world's leading oil traders, and he said that certainly on his oil trading desk, they are now looking at what we call triple-digit oil. That means oil above $100 a barrel, potentially up from around $75 a barrel now. Again, we're not saying that's going to happen. It's good news, actually, that the US has released lots of oil in the last 24 hours from its strategic petroleum reserve, trying to flood global markets with oil, trying to keep price pressures down. The Saudis have done the same, of course, the linchpin provider in the world at the heart of that OPEC exporters cartel. In recent months, the Saudis have actually been limiting oil supplies to push prices up. Now they've reversed that because they don't want to see the global economy really slow down. That will undermine oil demand as a whole. And this morning we had some GDP numbers, and it was, I wouldn't say it was good news, but it wasn't bad news. Let's have a look at some of those GDP numbers. I think we can bring them up on the screen. And the basic picture is that in October, you saw GDP contract 0.3%, and then in November, the last month before Christmas, we saw GDP recover up 0.3%. So GDP is the growth in the global economy, the sum total of goods and services. So basically, over the 2 months, the economy flatlined. And that happened because we saw strong retail sales, Black Friday and so on in the run-up to Christmas in November. But I'm afraid we did see a slowdown in construction and manufacturing. But look, again, as we go back to this geopolitical reality, if we don't see some kind of suppression, some kind of calming of tensions in the Middle East, let alone Russia-Ukraine, which of course could also escalate in the months to come, then I do think we are in danger of seeing an energy price spike, and that will, as I say, completely reverse the whole narrative of British politics. I know I say this all the time. I know I'm the economics and business editor. I'm also intensely interested in politics. That's why I hang out down here at Westminster quite a lot. But in the end, the economy always wins. It's the economy that drives politics, and that's going to be particularly the case in the run-up to this general election. And the economic narrative, an improving economy, could be completely upended unless we see these geopolitical tensions ease, and soon.
Yeah, just when we thought we were turning a corner. Liam Halligan in Westminster, thank you so much as always for your expertise.
Well, still to come, we do want to hear from you on what you make of the UK getting involved in military action against the Houthis. Do get in touch with us today. The email is gbviews@gbnews.com.
Yep, all that and much more after your morning news with Sam Francis.
Ben, Ellie, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. The headlines at just after 10:30. Well, first to some breaking news. We now know at this stage that 5 people have been killed and 6 others were wounded in those strikes by the US and the UK in Yemen overnight. That news coming to us from a Yemeni news agency. 4 RAF Typhoons joined US aircraft to target facilities in Yemen that were linked to attacks on ships in the Red Sea. A spokesman for the militant group says they will continue, though, to block the passage of ships. And they're also warning the UK and the US will not go without punishment or retaliation. However, Minister for Armed Forces James Heappey says the UK was acting in self-defence.
The action last night was the necessary, proportionate, limited response required to act in self-defence of the UK and US warships that are in the southern Red Sea, seeking to protect commercial shipping as it transits on that vital route between Europe and Asia. What we did last night was to degrade and disrupt the Houthi capability to launch those attacks. It shouldn't be seen as the start of anything more.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is making a surprise visit to the Ukraine as the government announced it will provide $2.5 billion in military aid to the country over the coming year. It comes as the Ukrainian president presses allies in the West to provide more support in the fight against Russian forces. That's as the war approaches the 2-year mark. Rishi Sunak says the UK will not falter in its support and will stand with Ukraine in their darkest hours. The economy grew by 0.3% in November, that's according to the Office for National Statistics. GDP had declined by the same amount in October. The latest uplift, though, was driven by the services sector, the biggest contributor to economic growth, with a rise of 0.4%. However, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says growth will be slower as the government works to bring inflation back to its 2% target. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this morning. The pound will buy you $1.2750 and €1.1632. The price of gold is £1,599.50 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,631 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Do stay with us. We are going to reflect that breaking news from the Yemeni news agency that 5 people have been killed and 6 others were wounded in strikes by the US and the UK in Yemen overnight. We'll be asking you what you think about Britain joining the US in carrying out those targeted strikes against Houthi rebels. Do keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben and Ellie. Stay with us.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens with our team of dedicated journalists across the UK. We're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:41. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and Ellie Costello. Lots of you getting in touch about the breaking news that Yemeni media is reporting that there was 5 dead and 6 injured in those US-UK strikes last night. Let's kick off with Karen. Good morning, Karen. You say, in this country we are shafted by our politicians, and Rishi Sunak is deliberately impoverishing us further by giving billions of pounds we can't afford to help Ukraine. Of course, Sunak in Kyiv this morning sealing the deal for more aid with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president.
We've also been talking about the lack of parliamentary vote last night and what you make of that. Alan says, my view is that if we had a parliament full of statesmen and stateswomen, then a vote would be respected. Unfortunately, the electorate see the claims by the opposition for a debate and a vote as political theatre, and I think it should be avoided at all costs.
And actually, on that point, sorry to interrupt, Ellie, Tim says the only problem with the votes in a democratic country is that it no longer remains a secret and the enemy knows you're coming. Very good point.
Yeah, it's a good point, but Grant Shapps was talking to the media on Wednesday, I believe, and said watch this space when he was asked about military actions. You could say already on the cards.
Yeah.
Jeff says no, there should not have been a parliamentary debate prior to our forces' action. All the Corbynite appeasers would just delay the action, which was very necessary. We have general elections to determine our government, and we charge them with our security and our well-being. That is their job. Opposition parties are there to scrutinise government policy, not determine it or pre-approve it.
Yeah, some people comparing it to the invasion of Iraq. I mean, the obvious difference is that we haven't invaded Yemen. We've just taken out some key military sites. So let's get some more of this now with our panel, political commentator Matthew Stadlen and political commentator Emma Webb. Let's start with you, Matthew. Are you in support of the US, UK and obviously Netherlands, Bahrain were in there as well, the action last night on the Houthi rebels?
Yeah, I can't see that they have much of a choice. And the British government certainly doesn't have to request permission from Parliament, because this is a prerogative power. In other words, it's an executive power of the government. I would say that by not going the parliamentary route, not having a debate about it so far, that means that if things go badly wrong, and we do have a track record of things going very badly wrong when we intervene in the Middle East, then that's going to be on Rishi Sunak.
And what about this breaking news from Yemen that there was 5 killed and 6 injured in the strikes last night? We don't know whether they're civilian casualties. I guess that would be a different kettle of fish compared to if it was Houthi rebels who had died. Does that change the game in any way?
Clearly the aim was not to kill civilians, and it seems to me on the face of it that this is proportionate action and it's in our national self-defence.
Emma, what do you think in this? I mean, Rishi Sunak says this was limited, necessary and proportionate action in self-defence. Would you agree?
Completely. I think it's a necessity. I think we are sort of squeamish, and we've become more and more squeamish about this in the West. I think we need to accept that, you know, we have enemies. Sometimes it is necessary to assert power in order to secure peace. You know, the Houthis, you have to remember, you know, they are the ones who are firing missiles and endangering lives on merchant vessels in the Red Sea. This has serious implications, not just for global security, but also for global trade. It's an absolutely reasonable action. I think that, while I take Matthew's point, I think that taking this to Parliament as a kind of backside covering activity would have, you know, would have put that. I don't think it would have been appropriate to put that above being effective. As you said, Ben, they are attacking military targets specifically, and yes, sometimes in these instances you do end up with collateral damage, people do get injured, but that is just the reality of how things are, and so I think that this action was absolutely necessary. The situation was unsustainable. If it is done effectively, it would help to avoid further escalation. Obviously there are reasons to think that, you know, this might not be as easily solved perhaps as we think it is, but this has, as you know, has been pointed out already on this channel this morning, this has Iran's hands all over it. You know, this is part of a more complex global political and military situation, and I think we were absolutely to act in the way that we did.
There are problems, though, because although I support these strikes, and I believe that they are in self-defence, there are important questions that follow up. What happens if they don't work? Then how far do we go? How many times do we strike the Yemeni mainland? And there are, I mean, if you read the analysis about this, the Houthis have been gagging to draw in America and the West for years. They've been building up their munitions thanks to the evil regime in Iran. They've been building up their forces, and they want to be seen, it seems, as a global player, and now they are that.
And let's be clear, we're not just dealing with some ragtag militants running around with AK-47s here. They're a 200-strong rebel group. They've got a lot of money. 200,000, yeah. They've got backing from Iran. Joe Biden, of course, unfroze around $6 billion worth of Iranian assets at the tail end of last year. So they've got money, they've got weapons. We're not just dealing with a couple of guys running around the coast of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Diane Abbott has tweeted again on Twitter, X. She says, when the Tories should be backing a ceasefire in Gaza, instead they send jet fighters to back the US against the Houthis. No parliamentary approval and no idea where it will all end. Emma, why do people like Diane on, I guess, the far left of the argument always assume that military action can never take place no matter the circumstance? I mean, surely we'd be speaking German if that was the case.
It's a very bizarre mindset that is completely lacking in common sense. The situation could not have been allowed to continue as was happening in the Red Sea since the attacks on October the 7th. This action was completely necessary, but of course we know that people like Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn, a certain segment of the Labour Party will oppose any situation in which the West defends itself. You look at the way that the Houthis responded to these attacks by saying that that this is aggression and that they will retaliate and so on. It's typical almost Islamist cry-bully behaviour. And I think what you see is that people like Diane Abbott will always side with the enemies of the West. Always. And so it's entirely predictable that her response would be completely sort of inside out.
There's no doubt that these rebels are terrorists, right? And we have to defend ourselves.
Well, I don't think they're yet designated a terrorist group. I think they were, and the US rescinded it at some point. Just to be factual.
If you fire missiles,
it is an act of terrorism.
if you fire missiles at civilian ships, at cargo ships, then in my understanding of what a terrorist is, you are a terrorist. What this is showing, though, is that two things could be true at the same time. Israel's disproportionate actions in Gaza, and we've all seen the horrific images that have followed on from the medieval barbarity that we witnessed on October the 7th, is not helping anyone. It's not helping Israel, it's not helping the region, and it's not helping our interests. And we have to do more to stop Israel overreaching itself.
I wanted to get both your thoughts on Rishi Sunak and what he does now, because I believe we have some pictures now. He's in Ukraine, he's in Kyiv today, discussing a new military aid package for Volodymyr Zelensky and for Ukraine. Now, what do you make of the optics of this? Of course, with the strikes that we're seeing last night, we heard from Mark White, our Homeland Security Editor, about our depleted Royal Navy. And actually, we are acting now in the Red Sea with very limited resources. Do you think this is going to come to the fore in the next few days?
I think this should remind us that how important it is to have a strong military, because the extent to which we are militarily stretched, and the fact that Britain is known for having such an incredible navy, that it's almost an embarrassment to be stretched in this way. We need to be investing more in...
Emma, I'm going to ask the question here on behalf of a lot of our viewers. Sunak, the picture's now on the screen, is sitting with Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, signing the deal on yet more military aid for the country to defend itself against the invasion of Russia. People are going to be asking, why are we doing this on a day when we're getting involved in the Red Sea, yet we're quite clearly ill-equipped? We've got aircraft carriers with no jets on. We've got 2 ships being decommissioned because there's not enough sailors. Where's the sense in this? That's what voters are going to be asking.
Yeah, I think we need to know exactly how our money is being spent with respect to the UK's strategic interests. So the main reason for supporting Ukraine, aside from the fact that Russia is the aggressor and it's the right thing to do, the main reason for supporting Ukraine is specifically because it is in our interests. And the public need to know how that money is being used insofar as it helps to secure us as a nation. Because, as you say, we've got all of these other conflict zones and fronts opening up around the world. The situation is extremely volatile, and all of these things are tied into each other. So Russia is an ally of Iran. Iran is backing the Houthis. They're also backing Hezbollah, who've also come out and condemned this action.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing here, I think, is a military and geopolitical realignment in action, and it needs to be managed strategically and carefully and prudently. And we need to make sure that our money is, the way that our money is being spent is effective, and that we're very clear about, what our purposes are in how we use them.
It's very clear why we're continuing to arm and support Ukraine. I'm not a fan of Rishi Sunak, but I think he's right on this. We don't want the monstrous regime of the Kremlin marching its boots over Europe.
Right, but how long does that go on for? Is it a bottomless pit of British taxpayer money? When does it end?
Because he's given a certain amount so far, and I think we will continue to contribute. but this sort of backlash against Western support for a democracy against a tyranny in the form of Putin, I think is madness and populist. I think it's nonsense.
Matthew, I'd argue it's not.
We have to defend freedom in Europe, and if we give in to bullies like Putin, or if we give in to bullies like the Houthis, our interests in the end get degraded.
I think it's a bit unfair to say it's a backlash when ordinary Brits who are struggling to even afford their own cost of living, when they raise a slight concern about when this aid to Ukraine is going to end. I've just said again, is it a bottomless pit? It's unfair to just say it's a backlash, be quiet, don't ask the question.
I haven't said be quiet, I said it's nonsense.
Well, I mean, that's essentially what you're saying.
What you're saying is we should give in to bullies in the Kremlin.
I'm asking, I'm saying how long does it go on for? When does this end?
Well, until Russian forces withdraw from European soil. That's where they are. They've done unspeakable, appalling things in Europe. They've kidnapped Ukrainian children. Now, let me finish. They've taken Ukrainian forces, prisoners of war, and then forced them back onto the front to fight Ukrainians. Kremlin is an absolutely horrific person who's doing terrible things. And if we give in to that sort of bully, if we'd given in to Hitler, then, as you said earlier, we would be speaking German. We have to be absolutely resolute in defending Ukrainian democracy against Russian tyranny.
OK, Matthew, Emma, thank you very much indeed. You'll have a view on that. Do let us know what it is. gbnews@gbnews.com.
Yeah, stay with us. Lots more to come on the Yemen situation. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst it is going to be quite a cloudy day today, for many of us staying dry, but some rain arriving in the north later. Ahead of it though, we have some clear skies first thing across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, so a frosty start here, some freezing fog patches to watch out for, and these could linger well into the afternoon. Further south for much of England and Wales, largely cloudy, perhaps some brighter breaks developing at times, particularly for western parts of Wales, maybe some further inland, but on the whole a cloudy picture and a cold one too. Temperatures suppressed, most places staying in mid-single figures at best. As we go through this evening and overnight, we start to see a front pushing its way in from the northwest. And so initially some persistent rain across northern parts of Scotland, but it breaks up as it makes its way southwards. So by the time we head towards the early hours of Saturday morning, it's really not going to bring a huge amount across northern England and Northern Ireland. Another chilly night to come though, a touch of frost in some places, perhaps some icy patches to watch out for, and again some fog patches as well. As we go through Saturday itself then, that front does continue to push its way a little bit further southwards, but doesn't bring a huge amount of rain. In fact, far southern parts likely to stay mostly dry, albeit quite cloudy at times, limited bright or sunny spells, but we should see some. Further north, increasing amounts of sunshine perhaps, but also some showers towards the north, and again a cold day, temperatures suppressed for many. Into Sunday, cold Arctic air across many of us, so even colder with more snow showers in the north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Still to come, is the UK prepared for military action against the Houthis, and should Rishi Sunak have taken his decision to Parliament? You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben and Ellie, the People's Channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Friday, the 12th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and me, Ellie Costello.
The US and the UK forces have carried out airstrikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen, with the Yemeni news agency Saba reporting 5 dead and 6 injured as a result. It's a joint response to the attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthis on ships in the Red Sea.
Well, the Houthi Deputy Foreign Minister warns the US and the UK will pay a heavy price for this blatant aggression and insists its attacks, both on Israel and on commercial ships in the Red Sea, will continue in response to Israel's war in Gaza.
And the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the strikes are, quote, limited, necessary and proportionate action in self-defence. Strikes are reported in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, including the capital, Sana'a. We'll have the full analysis and the latest developments throughout the show. And of course, we want to know your views. This story really dividing the nation. Do you support the military action last night? Should we have gone to Parliament, as a lot of Labour MPs are calling for? Of course, Diane Abbott, now an independent, she's been getting stuck in on Twitter and X this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, here's your news headlines with Sam.
Ben, Ellie, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. The headlines at 11. Well, first to that breaking news that we've been hearing. 5 people have been killed and 6 others were wounded in strikes overnight by the US and the UK in Yemen. That's according to a Yemeni news agency. 4 RAF Typhoons joined the US to target facilities in Yemen that were linked to attacks on ships in the Red Sea. A spokesman for the militant group says they will continue to block the passage of ships. They're also warning the UK and the US will not go without punishment or retaliation. However, Minister for the Armed Forces, James Heappey, says the UK was acting in self-defence.
The action last night was the necessary, proportionate, limited response required to act in self-defence of the UK and US warships that are in the southern Red Sea, seeking to protect commercial shipping as it transits on that vital route between Europe and Asia. What we did last night was to degrade and disrupt the Houthi capability to launch those attacks. It shouldn't be seen as the start of anything more.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has said that he does back the government's decision to defend the Red Sea shipping lanes from Houthi rebels.
I do support, Labour does support this operation against the Houthi rebels. It's clear that for some time now they've been carrying out attacks on shipping, commercial shipping in the Red Sea, putting civilian lives at risk as well as disrupting international trade and traffic and shipping. And so we support this action.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is making a surprise visit to the Ukraine as the government announced it will provide £2.5 billion in military aid to the country over the coming year. It comes as the Ukrainian president presses allies in the West to provide more support in its fight against Russian forces as the war approaches the 2-year mark. Rishi Sunak says the UK will not falter in its support and that it will stand with Ukraine in its darkest hours. As we've been hearing, the economy here in the UK grew by 0.3% in November. That's according to the Office of National Statistics. GDP had declined by the same amount in October, but the latest uplift was driven by the services sector, the biggest contributor to that economic growth, with a rise of 0.4%. However, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says growth will be slower as the government works to bring inflation back to its 2% target. The Post Office has been accused of threatening the BBC over a panorama programme that involved Horizon IT whistleblowers. The broadcaster says experts who were interviewed for the programme in 2015 were sent intimidating letters by Post Office lawyers. This week, the Post Office inquiry heard from Stephen Bradshaw, who helped lead the criminal investigation into some of those who were wrongly convicted as branch managers. He admitted he was not an expert on the Horizon IT system, but that he was aware there were issues with that system. Well, we have understood that protesters are gathered outside the International Court of Justice in The Hague in honour of hostages taken in the 7th of October attacks. It comes as judges there hold the second day of hearings over the ongoing war in Gaza. South Africa is claiming that the Israeli operation is a state-led genocide aimed at wiping out the Palestinian population. Israel, though, says the accusations brought by South Africa are grossly distorted. Legal advisor for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Tal Becker, says action in Gaza is an act of self-defence.
The applicant has now sought to invoke this term in the context of Israel's conduct in a war it did not start and did not want. A war in which Israel is defending itself against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations whose brutality knows no bounds.
Princess Anne is on her final day of engagements in Sri Lanka to mark 75 years of diplomacy with Britain. The princess laid flowers at a cemetery marking those who died during the First and Second World War. She's also visited a Hindu temple in the capital and received a blessing from the chief priest. And a bear found abandoned in a zoo in Ukraine has now arrived at its new home in Scotland. The Five Sisters Zoo rescued and rehomed the Asiatic bear named Yampil. Ukrainian soldiers had discovered the abandoned zoo when they arrived there in July 2022, 5 months after the ongoing Russian invasion. Out of nearly 200 animals at the zoo, Yampil the bear was just one of the few animals to survive the invasion. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom. For more, we're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Ben and Ellie.
Thanks, Sam. It's 6 minutes past 11. Loads of you getting in touch this morning. Thank you so much for your company, of course, in reaction to US and UK airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen last night. David says, why is the UK acting alone with the US? Does the current not affect the rest of Europe? Yes, lots of people asking the same question. Where is Spain? Where is Italy? Where is France? Where is Germany?
Yeah, why is it always the US and the UK sort of, tagging along behind, leading the charge against you know, these kind of despots. Les says, good morning, Les. It isn't just about joining in with the US. We have assets and personnel in the area, which was attacked. We have every right and duty to retaliate and defend ourselves.
Yes, Adrian agrees, saying, I agree with the attacks on the Houthi rebels in Yemen. We cannot let Iranian-backed fundamentalists control shipping. The world is at a pivotal moment and the West must stand up for freedom.
And Pippa says, morning Pippa, so here we go again. Why is it that the UK public always ends up punished when we go to war? Fuel, food, energy. Why do we bother? It's pathetic.
Well, do keep those emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. And of course, we're talking about this because Britain and the US have launched airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen.
Yes, the Houthis control much of Yemen and they say they're supporting their ally Hamas by targeting shipping heading to Israel. Yemeni media say the strikes have killed, and this is breaking actually in the last 30 minutes, they've killed 5 people and injured 6 others.
Well, the leader of the rebel group vows to respond to an assault with fresh attacks on Israeli and commercial ships in the Red Sea.
Our security editor, Mark White, joins us now in the studio. Mark, let's get stuck into this breaking news from Yemen, the death toll and the injury toll. Do we know any more about who died specifically? Is it rebels themselves? Or?
Well, certainly a Houthi spokesman that was giving a news conference in Yemen had said that they were Houthi members. So I think from that we take it to mean that they were Houthi rebels, militia members. Now, whether this is an interim death and injury toll, whether there are others, we don't know. I mean, it seems actually 5 dead and 6 injured to be a relatively light number of casualties, given that 60 separate airstrikes took place at 16 locations, involving 100 guided munitions, bombs and missiles that were launched at these sites. So given that, over a large stretch of the country, it doesn't seem like that many. It might be a preliminary...
What does that tell us, the low death count? Does it suggest that the Houthis knew we were coming?
Well, it's a very good point, because I and pretty much every other news organisation was reporting from fairly early on in the evening yesterday that there was an emergency cabinet meeting, and sources telling us that it was to acknowledge and announce that strikes were in the process of taking place. So, of course, in Yemen, they will be watching international media like everybody else, so they would have been aware. If they've got good sense, then they're going to get out of the areas that might be seen as potential targets, but clearly some didn't.
Well, we know that British forces supported the US with these strikes last night, but many people are asking where are the other European superpowers?
Well, I think it's a good point. We know that it was just the US and just the UK that launched these attacks with 100 of these precision-guided bombs and missiles. 4 RAF Typhoons flying out of RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, a 1,700-mile flight down to Yemen, and that's just to get in country, never mind to get to the location to drop your bombs, and then you've got to fly all the way back again. We're struggling with resources, really, within the British military to embark on this kind of endeavour, but we have. You know, we are often, of course, side by side with the Americans on such endeavours. The British government will argue, and those that support this intervention say, look, we are an island nation. 95% of the imports and exports that the UK relies on come by sea. We are then clearly adversely affected when you have a choke point like the Red Sea and the Suez Canal being threatened here, with ships having to make that extra 10 days to the journey going around the Cape of Good Hope, going around Africa, essentially. And as, you know, clearly irritating and angry as it's making people, the thought that we're being sucked into another conflict. The converse side of that is that we, if it continues the way it's continuing, are going to feel the the effects of that, the negative effects of that, in terms of the prices going up in the supermarkets, the prices of fuel, petrol supplies and the like, all adversely affected by events out in the Middle East.
Yeah, and of course putting all the hard work that we've suffered economically over the past couple of years to waste. Mark, can I ask you, is there something of a political open goal here for Sunak or Starmer to commit to more defence spending, especially in an election year? Is it as simple as that?
Well, the sad truth is, for those that support our military, it doesn't really gain a huge amount of votes amongst the electorate. You know, the population as a whole would
really
rather, yeah.
Is that in quite stark contrast to the US?
No, I think it's pretty much the same in every single country. Of course, you know, everybody or lots of people support the military and want to see them equipped. But when it comes down to the hard sort of questions, are you willing to forego this tax cut or to pay a little bit more to boost the military spending, then that's not quite as popular. But having said that, it's of course the #1 priority of any government is to protect its population, and we are in the world at the moment in a very, very dangerous place with lots of unrest in multiple locations around the globe. And, you know, when you've got that taking place, it's very worrying to see that you've got the Navy, the RAF and the Army all struggling really to meet their commitments with the budget they've been given. And to be fair to the government, the budget has been increasing of late, but it's just not kept up with inflation and the cost of these big-ticket items that they want, the ships and the tanks and all of the missiles.
Well, on that note of keeping people safe, Mark, I've had a couple of emails in on the same point. I want to put it to you. George says, I do support the need to protect shipping on the Red Sea, but I can't help but wonder if this all puts us at risk on British streets. What does this action mean for the terror threat level in this country, do you think?
Well, there's always a risk any time when there is a big overseas crisis, particularly in the Middle East. There's a potential risk to the UK. Sadly, we've seen in the past events such as the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan being a trigger point for some of those that wish to do people harm, not just in the UK, but other Western nations as well. And we've had multiple attacks that have been, the justification from these crazies that have carried out these horrific events has always been, it's this war, it's that war. So clearly there's concern. We've already seen some attacks that have taken place in Europe and the US that have been directly linked to the conflict in Palestine at the moment, in Gaza. And the longer that continues, the more potential risk there is. The terror threat level has not increased. It's still at substantial, meaning an attack is likely. But, behind the scenes, the security services and counter-terrorism police are working very hard to keep an eye on those known extremists. The trouble is, it's the unknown extremists that are often the problem, the ones who self-radicalise in their bedrooms over the internet, looking at these images, then go off to the kitchen drawer, get a big knife out and decide to kill people, or get behind the wheel of a vehicle and decide to kill people. Yeah, those lone wolf attacks. Well, our intelligence agencies and, of course, our military as well, they all do a sterling job, so credit to them all for keeping us safe. Home and Security Editor Mark White, thank you so much. You'll be sticking with us throughout the show.
Well, we can hear now from Sir Keir Starmer on those strikes against Houthi rebels. This is what he had to say.
I do support, Labour does support this operation against the Houthi rebels. It's clear that for some time now they've been carrying out attacks on shipping, commercial shipping in the Red Sea, putting civilian lives at risk, as well as disrupting international trade and traffic and shipping. And so we support this action.
Well, let's speak now to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, good morning to you. Hearing there from Sir Keir Starmer saying he supports this action. We've also had Diane Abbott, now an independent MP for Hackney, saying that Sir Keir Starmer is a hypocrite, essentially, that he called for no more illegal wars, and yet he supports this one.
Well, I think this all shows just what a problem Keir Starmer has with foreign policy. Obviously, we saw at the beginning of the attacks in Israel and Gaza, there were MPs on the left of the Labour Party calling for a ceasefire. Keir Starmer stood up to them, but he ended up losing a shadow cabinet minister over it. We're seeing something similar happen here. So Keir Starmer has essentially completely backed the government. He said that he fully supports these strikes and that shipping channel needs to be defended. Those on the left of his party don't agree. They say that Parliament should have been recalled last night before any decision was taken. That's what the Lib Dems are saying as well. Layla Moran, the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the Lib Dems, has said that Parliament should have been recalled last night. The usual suspects are saying the same on the Labour side. We've got Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, independents now, but also Zara Sultana, the Coventry MP on the left of the party. She holds quite a lot of sway in the Labour Party. She has quite a lot of left-wing followers with her. And Keir Starmer has disagreed with her on this. He said that he would like to see Parliament debate on it as soon as possible, but he fell short of actually calling for Parliament to be recalled. These splits in the Labour Party are not going away. On domestic policy, Keir Starmer has managed to sort of find an equilibrium. He basically brings the left of his party along with him on domestic policy. But on foreign policy, and especially where foreign policy touches Israel and Palestine, Keir Starmer has a real problem with the left of his party. And every time a story about Israel and Palestine, about foreign policy in general, raises its head, Keir Starmer is going to prove to the country again that there are splits within the Labour Party which are not going away. And that is going to be increasingly a problem for him as we head into this election year.
Numbers, and they reckon that if the situation in the Red Sea continues, oil will be hiked up by $10 a barrel, natural gas up 25%. All this, of course, throwing a spanner in Rishi Sunak's aim to reduce inflation and, of course, grow the economy. If this continues, is it going to prove fatal to the Prime Minister's election battle plan this year?
Well, it is a big problem for Rishi Sunak. He asked us at the beginning of 2023, Rishi Sunak stood up in front of a room of journalists and asked us to judge him on how he delivered on his 5 pledges. Now, the areas in those 5 pledges where so far he's doing best is on the economy. Inflation did halve last year, as he promised, and although we aren't seeing growth of GDP yet, the OBR has forecast that that will begin to happen in the second half of this decade. Rishi Sunak's whole election campaign essentially hinges on things getting better for people over the course of 2024. That's why he's holding off having an election in the first half of this year. He is hoping that as interest rates continue to go down as a result of inflation continuing to go down, and as he was hoping the cost of oil started to go down, that cost of living crisis would begin to ease. People would feel a little bit richer. Hopefully people's mortgage repayments will start to go down. And overall, people might, just might, agree to vote for the Conservatives again. If, as you say, this situation in the Red Sea continues, GDP across the whole world will continue to struggle, and Britain will be no different. And as you say, that cost of oil will have the most tangible, obvious effect, because people's energy prices, which is the driving force of inflation, will continue to go up. That causes a real electoral headache for Rishi Sunak. So this situation isn't great for either of the main parties.
Olivia, whilst we've got you, wanted to reflect Rishi Sunak in Kyiv today, announcing a new military aid package with President Zelensky there. And we've been hearing from Mark White, our Home Security Editor, throughout the morning about how stretched our own navy is and quite how limited our resources are, really, in terms of embarking on this endeavour. How do you think the optics of this look to the electorate, to people who'd be voting in the next general election? And do you think defence will become more of a priority than perhaps what we've seen before?
I think that's a really interesting question. Up until now, we've seen that the UK public has been very, very supportive on the whole of any measures that the government takes to help Ukraine. If you travel around the sort of shires of England, the north of England, you will see Ukrainian flags still hanging from village halls, etc. The public on the whole is supportive of this. But obviously we are in a cost of living crisis. The situation in the Red Sea at the moment, as we've talked about, could exacerbate that, and it could be that public sympathy for Ukraine starts to morph into a more an attitude of making sure that the UK is okay first. That question about defence spending is really, really important too. The UK is now today pledging a 2.5 billion aid package to Ukraine for 2024-2025. That's 200 million more than in previous years. And of course, at the same time, the armed forces are now deployed to the Red Sea. So you can see just how stretched that defence budget is. Ben Wallace, the previous Defence Secretary, called for an increase in defence spending. Jeremy Hunt denied him that increase. I wonder if he's regretting that decision now. The UK military, as we've been hearing all morning, has been seriously, seriously depleted over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And now it has a lot of places to be. How is Rishi Sunak going to square that circle in the run-up to the next election? Will he promise more defence spending, or by that time, will it simply be too late for that?
OK, Olivia Utley there for us in Westminster. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Still to come, we'll have all the reaction from across the pond in the US as President Biden launched those military strikes along with the UK and other nations last night on the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good morning, it's 11:27. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and me, Ellie Costello.
Well, after today's strikes, President Joe Biden has warned the Houthi rebels warned that the US will not hesitate to strike the Houthi rebels again in Yemen and the Red Sea. And it comes as in the last few minutes, actually, Turkish President Erdogan has said, and this is quite significant, actually, he says the strikes against the Houthis are, quote, not proportionate, and accusing the US and Britain of, quote, turning the Red Sea into a sea of blood. Extraordinary language from Erdogan there, and fairly significant. Well, look, joining us now in the studio is a man who knows a bit about US politics. It's chair of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Greg, let's kick things off with that rather, as I said, extraordinary statement from Turkey President Erdogan, turning the Red Sea into a sea of blood. I mean, that's fairly extreme, isn't it?
It's pretty outrageous. And if you look at what the Houthis have done in the last few months, and in the last few years for that matter, but the IRCG has been, funding these rebels to attack American servicemen. It's not just commercial ships in the Red Sea. And so there was even an attack on Christmas Day where an Army helicopter pilot took a shrapnel to the head. He's in a hospital in Germany right now in a coma. So if anything, this was too little, too late, or maybe I should say better late than never. But Biden and the administration have been dragging their feet. It's about time they did this. Erdogan is being silly or being foolish. This is, and they're obsessed with this whole proportionality thing. Proportionality isn't, okay, we have to do exactly what they did to me. It's what's the military target? What is the military benefit? And the proportionality should be, considering civilians. They telegraphed this. This was not a surprise attack like when the Trump administration executed General Soleimani in Iran. That was done in a very stealthy, very, overnight drone strike. This was telegraphed. The Defense Department, the Pentagon spokesman, basically gave them the heads up yesterday afternoon in the U.S.
US lawmakers are slamming Joe Biden right now for launching these strikes at the backing from Congress. Some Democrats lashing out at the president for neglecting his constitutional responsibilities. But you actually think he should have reacted faster and harder.
I think so. There are moments where you cannot go to Congress because this was not some invasion. This was a retaliatory strike against an aggressor. And so I think, and you'll notice the critics are mostly from the Progressive Caucus. So, surprise, surprise, the critics of this strike are Jeremy Corbyn, the Progressive Caucus in the U.S., and Erdogan in Turkey. So it kind of shows you where people are aligned on this thing.
What does this attack, or this whole situation on the Red Sea, say about the perception of the US, the UK and the West as a whole? Because let me just go back to Joe Biden. After the very botched withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, we've had Putin invading Ukraine. We've had President Xi Jinping of China on his New Year's Day address saying that this will be the year that the, quote, motherland Taiwan returns to China. Hamas invaded Israel, and now Iran is kicking off via the proxy Houthi rebels. Are our adversaries emboldened by the apparent weakness of Joe Biden?
They really are. And it started, yes, with Afghanistan. That was a complete and utter disaster, and he still had the gall to say that it was a success. If that's a success, I'd like to see a failure. But more importantly, it's all about deterrence. And what you saw in the Reagan years, and even from the Trump administration, was peace through strength. And the best way to avoid war is to prepare for war. And what Biden has done, he's obsessed with DEI and other rubbish in the military. He's cut defense spending at a time like this, with all the uncertainty. He's cut defense spending by 3% in real terms. And then he's been critical of the military in many cases. So this is not a president that demonstrates strength. So now he's playing from behind. He's playing catch up, which is never the position.
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump, because of course there are no wars under Trump's premiership. His fans and supporters would say he got things done with threats and apparent strength. He was the first president to meet a North Korean leader and cross the demilitarised zone. What would Trump do in this situation? Would we have even got to this point if Trump was in charge?
Probably not. And I think if there was any retaliation from a Trump president, it would have been done in October when the first missiles flew. I mean, they were firing at U.S. military bases in Iraq and other places. So when soldiers are at risk, there has to be an immediate response. That's why I think, again, they couldn't go through the congressional routine, because it had to be done. It should have been done months ago. I don't think it would have happened under Trump. Look what he did in Ukraine. For all the criticism about Trump, cozying up with Putin or talking to Putin, he sent Javelin missiles to Ukraine, while the Obama and Biden administration was sending blankets to an airbase in Poland and shipping them via truck to Kyiv without an American flag on it. Trump was sending, javelins and other lethal material to Ukraine. So he was much tougher on Russia than his predecessor or Biden in his term as president.
Greg Svensson from Republicans Overseas, very good to see you this morning. Thank you very much. Now, do stay with us. Still to come, the latest developments on the UK's targeted strikes on the Houthi rebels. Are we prepared for further military escalation?
All that and much more after your morning news with Sam.
Ben, Ellie, thank you very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines are just after 11:30. Well, as we've been hearing, 5 people have been killed and 6 others were wounded in the strikes by the US and the UK in Yemen overnight. That's according to a Yemeni news agency. 4 RAF Typhoons joined US aircraft to target facilities in Yemen that were linked to attacks on ships in the Red Sea. A spokesman for the militant group says the UK and the US will not go without punishment or retaliation. However, Minister for the Armed Forces here in the UK, James Heapy, says the UK is acting in self-defence.
The action last night was the necessary, proportionate, limited response required to act in self-defence of the UK and US warships that are in the southern Red Sea, seeking to protect commercial shipping as it transits on that vital route between Europe and Asia. What we did last night was to degrade and disrupt the Houthi capability to launch those attacks. It shouldn't be seen as the start of anything more.
Rishi Sunak is making a surprise visit to Ukraine as the government announced it will provide £2.5 billion in military aid to the country over the coming year. It comes as the Ukrainian president presses allies in the West to provide more support in its fight against Russian forces. That comes as the war is approaching the 2-year mark. Rishi Sunak says the UK will not falter in its support and will stand with Ukraine in their darkest hours. Elsewhere, victims of the infected blood scandal say they feel marginalised and that they should get the same coverage as those caught up in the post office scandal. The lawyers representing 1,500 victims say the government should react properly, objectively and fully to everyone who is wronged in such circumstances. The Commons leader, Penny Mordaunt, said it wouldn't take an ITV drama to compensate the victims of the infected blood scandal and get that situation resolved. And finally, the economy grew by 0.3% in November. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. GDP had declined by the same amount in October, but the latest uplift was driven by the services sector, the biggest contributor to economic growth, with a rise of 0.4%. However, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says growth will be slower as the government works to bring inflation back to its 2% target. And as ever, you can get more on all of those stories and many more by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's another look at this morning's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2755 and €1.1639. The price of gold is £1,604 and 31 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,630 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, we'll be hearing what you have to say on Britain's military action last night against the Houthi rebels. Did Rishi Sunak make the right call? Keep your views coming in. Also, this big protest tomorrow, meant to be a pro-Palestine protest, similar to the ones we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Are we going to see a new wave of support for Houthi rebels? It wouldn't surprise me.
Yes, is it now going to be an anti-war demonstration? Let us know what you think. gbnews@gbnews.com. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Earlier on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. It's 11:41 with me, Ben Leo, and Ellie Costello.
And thank you so much for your company this morning. Loads of you emailing in with your thoughts on the US and UK strikes on Houthi rebels last night. Chris says, I absolutely support the government's decision to attack the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The world cannot be held hostage by a group of radical extremists who just want to see the West brought to its knees.
Yeah, good point. Maggie says the PM is responsible for looking after this country and its people. For once, he is correct. We needed to do something and it's done instead of waiting for a vote.
And Mike says the Houthis needed to be put in their place and cannot be allowed to threaten shipping with this piracy.
Yeah, and actually some really good points being made that if you do a vote and you publicise the fact that you're coming, then the enemy is going to be ready and prepared, which is perhaps why the death toll of the Houthi rebels is so low, according to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Just 5 people killed.
And 6 injured.
6 injured, yeah.
Robin, just one more view from the inbox is we have a minister authorising this action who has never been in the armed forces. This action should have been authorised by the whole of Parliament, as it could now lead to a war with Iran.
Do you need a minister that has been in the armed forces to be an armed forces minister?
Well, you'd be very limited, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I mean, he's not getting the best
Who would you
advice
have?
from...
You'd have Johnny Mercer, Ben Wallace, ex-armed forces.
I think Wallace is, yeah.
Wallace, yeah, there'd be very few who actually have that sort of experience, Robin. But do keep those views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.com. And let's widen it out, shall we, with our political commentator, Matthew Stadlin, and political commentator, Emma Webb, who are on our panel this morning. And what do you make on that point, Emma? Do you think that we need a minister with experience in the armed forces to make decisions like this? Or is this an executive power of government that they're entitled to take at a time like this?
I actually think that's a very important question that doesn't get mentioned enough, and I don't mean just in the context of this conversation, but the experience of ministers in general with respect to their role, because we don't have enough of an emphasis, I think, in our politics on experience, on relevant experience. Instead, you have sort of ministers cycled around to different posts where they don't really have enough time to pick up experience in a particular area and really be masterful of it. So, of course, I think it would be a huge benefit if you have somebody in that post who does have relevant experience in the armed forces. I don't think it's absolutely necessary that a minister has to have served in the armed forces in order to be a good minister of the armed forces, but it certainly would help.
Well, there is an argument against that, guys. And I interviewed Sir Malcolm Rifkind fairly recently. I was very impressed by him. He's a Conservative. He's a former Foreign Secretary, a former Defence Secretary. And he had not been in the armed forces. And as I say, he was in charge of our defence. And I think, if I remember correctly, he felt that the generals and the military leadership were rather relieved not to have had someone who'd been maybe quite junior in the armed forces and had wanted to out-general the generals. So there are some advantages, actually, of political figures not having been in the armed forces. On the other hand, I think Johnny Mercer does some really important work for veterans, and that is clearly a very, very personal mission on his part. Can I just come back on something you said earlier, Ben, this idea that a vote in Parliament, which, as I've said earlier, is not necessary because it's a prerogative power of the government to do what it's done, but that vote wouldn't have told the rebels that we're coming. They knew we were coming because they had been warned explicitly. They ignored that warning, and that's why they've been struck.
Yeah, Robert Fox, the defence editor from the Evening Standard, he told us earlier that actually the US and the UK had identified target sites as early as December. So,
and you'd hope so, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to warn these people that you're going to strike them, you have to assume that you may have to do that, and therefore you have to have a plan in place.
You are potentially giving them an imminent heads-up, though, because we know that, as Hamas do, that these sorts of groups, like Hezbollah, the Houthis, are likely to use human shields and then to use the footage of that devastation in their own propaganda. If you do give them an imminent heads-up, like, hey, guys, this is going to happen tomorrow, then you can imagine that they could take certain measures that would damage the effectiveness of the action that we choose to take.
Emma, let's stay with you for a moment, because Rishi Sunak is in Kyiv today. He's announcing a new military aid package with President Zelensky, the ongoing support there for Ukraine. We've been hearing from Mark White, our Home and Security editor, throughout the morning, describing our own Navy as depleted and talking about the very limited resources that we have in our own armed forces at the moment. I mean, with this situation in the Red Sea and launching of these strikes, do you think there will be more of a focus on defence, especially when we're coming up to an election?
This is so important that I don't think it can be overstated. There's a very good article in today's Telegraph by Rob Clark, who is an academic who had previously been in the armed forces. And he's making the point that this just reminds us further that the serious challenge that we face potentially if we're dragged into a conflict, and we have all of these different fronts opening up all over the world. We have a depleted Navy, we have a recruitment crisis in the Royal Navy, and we have a depleted armed forces. And it's really important that our armed forces is large enough and properly equipped enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing that are becoming an increasingly hostile global situation. So I think absolutely this should become a very important political issue. And I think we should see across the board a willingness from both parties to put more money into the armed forces and to solve the recruitment crisis, because it's an absurd situation that we're having to use companies like Serco to recruit deckhands for Royal Navy vessels. It's madness.
Matthew, come on then, let's have it out. Some would argue that the military has been overcome with what they would call wokeness, too much focus on diversity, inclusion, equality. Are we not focusing on what we need to be doing and defending our borders instead of all that?
We need to be as inclusive as possible right now, because as Emma says, we do have a recruitment crisis. We do need a strong and robust defensive capability in this country. We need sufficient warships, and our fleet has been depleted over recent years. We need sufficient warships to be able to be nimble so that if a crisis erupts in the Red Sea, as it has done, we can respond. And at the same time, we're able to defend our interests against Russia and help Ukraine. This is critical stuff. By the way, I'm going to try and force you as a neutral presenter, Ben, to defend your great mate Jeremy Corbyn. I noted that, I noted that Corbyn has said that these strikes are the wrong way forward. So I would ask Jeremy Corbyn, are you planning to go out and as a sort of deposition to Yemen and try and talk down the Houthi rebels? Does he really think that they're going to take him seriously? I just find that extraordinary.
I would like to see him do it.
Well, he might just say, I was in Yemen, but I was not in the company
present but not involved.
of those people. It does make me laugh with people like Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott and the far left of, I know they're independents now, but the Labour ilk. At what point do you commence military action? I mean, even Jeremy Corbyn wanted to get rid of our nuclear deterrent.
The problem is that we may find ourselves in a bit of a bind here. As I've said, I support this action. It seems to me to be proportionate. By proportionate, it doesn't mean you do exactly what the opposition does or the enemy does, because then it could be a stalemate. It means not overreaching yourself. This seems to be proportionate. It seems to be in our national self-interest and self-defence. The question is, what happens next? Could it backfire? Is this going to encourage and embolden the Houthis to do even more? And if it does, that's counterproductive, because there's going to be an even greater squeeze on that trading route. 15%, something like that, of world trade by sea comes through that area.
And actually, Emma, how can striking purely military sites, missile silos, launch pads, drone warehouses, how can striking those sites be anything but proportionate? I mean, are people like Diane Abbott saying, no, you shouldn't be targeting military sites? Is that what they're saying?
Well, I think the way that proportionality is represented often is misleading, because it's not about, tit for tat. It's not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Proportionality is proportionate to the military objective. The military objective is to stop the Houthis from endangering the lives of people on these ships and from firing their rockets, and making it safe for ships to pass through with trade and so on. So with respect to that, of course, this is absolutely proportionate. It couldn't be anything but. It's totally justifiable, it's totally legal and above board, and ultimately it's the right thing to do. And I just very quickly wanted to make one point about the army recruitment, because I think it's very important. I think we do run a risk if we acknowledge we need more people to be willing to go into our armed forces, we need to avoid a recruitment push that is focused on DEI, diversity, equality and inclusion.
Same question
because
to you,
we don't want to water down the quality of candidates by having criteria for candidates.
We haven't got enough
Hang
candidates.
on a second.
We haven't got enough candidates.
I need to finish my point. You need to let me finish my point, because you need to make sure that you are getting the best candidates for the job, for the purpose of being in the military, so we have a strong military. If you have other criteria that are superfluous and extraneous to military objectives that are simply to try and get more people in, you could easily end up with a situation where you have more people in the military, but it's just a less effective one.
Yeah, Matthew?
No, we've absolutely got to get more people into the military, and it seems there's a particular crisis in the Navy. Clearly, we only want people in those jobs who are capable of doing them. But if that means trying to encourage people from different areas of the community, different areas of society to get involved, then that's what we absolutely need to do. We need to have a robust defensive capability in this country. It's screamingly obvious. I just want to make, if I may, a very quick point about how serious this situation is. I mean, it may de-escalate. Let's hope it does, because it is affecting, or will affect, our cost of living crisis, which is already serious. But this is so big scale because we are effectively in a sort of proxy war now with Iran, because Iran is this big, bad regime that does terrible things to its own people, that hates the West, and it is arming these militias. It's been arming Hezbollah, it's armed Hamas, it wants to do terrible damage to the West, and we are going face to face with them now.
And can I remind you of the Turkish President Erdogan's comments in the last half an hour or so, saying that the US and the UK, A, were disproportionate in their retaliation, but B, turning the Red Sea into a sea of blood. That's extraordinary language, isn't it?
It's bizarre language from Erdogan, but we know that he's, in his own ways, a despot. I mean, terrible human rights abuses in Turkey. I mean, they'd call themselves a democracy, but it's not really a democracy.
Emma, let's pick up on Matthew's point there about the cost of living crisis, because the reality is we are all going to feel this in our pockets, aren't we? We'll feel it at the petrol pumps, we'll feel it in the shops as prices go up. There are much wider ramifications to just what we're seeing here in the Red Sea.
Well, this is why strategy is so important, because what we need is for our leaders to take a holistic understanding of the situation, because it involves politics, it involves military strategy. We need to be playing this, and I know this seems like a very obvious point to make, but perhaps it's not as obvious as it should be, that this needs to be played like a very careful game of chess, because we've got a situation here where you have various groups or actors that are essentially holding others hostage. They are... you're trying to avoid being put in a situation where it's checkmate, basically. And so it's very, very complicated, because Russia is an ally now of Iran, but also Russia needs to use the Red Sea. And even if they're not targeting Russian boats, it still has an impact on Russian trade. So it's an extremely complicated global situation. And if we are going to de-escalate it and try to have a prudent and proportionate response that is actually effective and uses our resources and our finances effectively, we need to have a holistic understanding of who the players are and what their interests are, so that we don't end up checkmate.
Great stuff. Matthew Sutherland, Emma Webb, thank you for joining us. That's it from Britain's Newsroom with myself and Ellie. Thank you for being with us. And Ellie, thank you for having me, sharing this duty with you this morning.
Yes, and thank you for your company at home and for all your emails as well. Up next is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Pip.
An enormous afternoon of news today. Not only are we expecting the Prime Minister to speak from Ukraine, but also an exclusive interview with former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. We'll be bringing that to you this hour. It's explosive.
Also, in more refreshing news, we are telling you the pub of the year. Where is it? All to be revealed very shortly.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, I'm Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst it is going to be quite a cloudy day today, for many of us staying dry, but some rain arriving in the north later. Ahead of it though, we have some clear skies first thing across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, so a frosty start here, some freezing fog patches to watch out for, and these could linger well into the afternoon. Further south for much of England and Wales, largely cloudy, perhaps some brighter breaks developing at times, particularly for western parts of Wales, maybe some further inland, but on the whole a cloudy picture and a cold one too. Temperatures suppressed, most places staying in mid-single figures at best. As we go through this evening and overnight, we start to see a front pushing its way in from the northwest. And so initially some persistent rain across northern parts of Scotland, but it breaks up as it makes its way southwards. So by the time we head towards the early hours of Saturday morning, it's really not going to bring a huge amount across northern England and Northern Ireland. Another chilly night to come though, a touch of frost in some places, perhaps some icy patches to watch out for, and again some fog patches as well. As we go through Saturday itself then, that front does continue to push its way a little bit further southwards, but doesn't bring a huge amount of rain. In fact, far southern parts likely to stay mostly dry, albeit quite cloudy at times, limited bright or sunny spells, but we should see some. Further north, increasing amounts of sunshine perhaps, but also some showers towards the north, and again a cold day, temperatures suppressed for many. Into Sunday, cold Arctic air across many of us, so even colder with more snow showers in the north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting. We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 p.m. on Friday, the 12th of January. Coming up today, we have an exclusive interview with the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman. It's her first TV interview since being sacked by Rishi Sunak in October, and we'll bring it to you shortly.
The UK strikes back. 2 days after Iran-backed Houthi rebels fired attack drones at the Royal Navy, the UK and the US launch an overnight operation. They've struck 16 sites in Yemen and killed at least 5 Houthi rebels.
Rishi speaks. We'll hear live from the Prime Minister as he makes a surprise visit to Ukraine alongside top military officials. The UK is providing more cash for British-made surveillance, long-range strike drones and sea drones. A new UK-Ukraine security agreement is to be signed this afternoon.
And in more refreshing news, we'll be telling you which pub has been crowned British Pub of the Year now 2 times in a row. We'll be in the West Midlands. There's a clue to find out.
It rather seems that Rishi Sunak's planned trip to Ukraine has been a bit overshadowed by events overnight, Pip.
Well, he's been going to the scene of one conflict, whilst talking about another and having emergency meetings to see exactly what action is going to be taken against Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. And you might be thinking, oh, it's way